This is Old World USA with me, your host, John Thompson. On this episode, we're going to be looking at the history of Reno, Nevada. Now, according to the Wikipedia page, Reno was founded in 1868. It was named after Major General Jesse L. Reno, who was killed at the Battle of South Mountain in 1862 during the American Civil War. The distance between the battle and Reno is about 3,600 kilometers. This is comparable to the distance from one end of Europe to the other, an area which comprises of around 40 different countries. The Civil War took place from 1861 to 1865 and was mainly focused around the southeast of the United States. Now, historians want you to believe that 3 years after this war ended, people jumped onto their horse and wagons, traveled 3,000 kilometers across the United States into the Wild West, just to found a city named after General Reno. The official history of Reno will tell you that the town came into being on May 9th, 1868. The official Wikipedia for the railroad claims that on June 18th, 1868, the Central Pacific reached Reno. This would be 40 days after the town was founded. However, the Wikipedia for Reno itself actually claims that the railroad station was established first, before the town of Reno officially came into being. The first question would be, why would they build a railway station to a town that didn't exist yet? This image that historians give us is from 1868. This is clearly a Wild West type town with muddy streets and horse and wagons everywhere. They say this town was founded in 1868. This photo shows us the original Ormsby House in 1863. This is 5 years before the town existed. We can see stone buildings with decorative roofs and arched windows. On the front have been added simple wooden verandas, that's these sections here, but behind we can clearly see large brick buildings. Now look at the road. It's just mud and dirt. Sections here are piled up. And these men, they seem to be digging up the road. Now this is the Nevada State Prison near Reno in Carson City. The picture is from 1875 and clearly shows a destroyed wall on the left side. The brickwork would date this to around 1300 AD or J300. Now, if we were to compare this so-called Nevada State Prison, supposedly built in 1862, to this Spanish fort which was founded in Florida almost 200 years earlier, why does the older fort look more advanced? Particularly this sentry box. I think it's clear that this prison was actually a fort. They say the prison was constructed in 1862. So how has the wall collapsed in only 13 years? Also, how was the Nevada State Prison constructed in 1862, when Nevada didn't become a state until 1864? Logically, before that, this must have been a local prison. So let's look at the population in 1862. They say in 1860, there was 714 people living in Carson City. Today, 0.7% of the US population is in jail. That means in 1870, Carson City should have had a prison population of 4.998, which we'll just say 5. Now ask yourself this. Would you need to build a massive prison that looks like a fort just to house 5 prisoners? Let's add Reno's population in 1860 of 1,035. 0.7% of that is 7.2, so a total of 12 prisoners between the two cities. Only 4 years after founding Carson City and 6 years before founding Reno, they needed to construct this prison to house 5 prisoners. And only 13 years later, the wall has already collapsed. Let's go back to Reno and see a drawing of the town in 1875. We can see that many of these buildings have multiple stories. And if we go back to our image from 1863, this would suggest that these buildings were here before. Now remember, this is 5 years before the railroad station opened. So all of this material to build all of these buildings must have been transported by horse and buggy to a town which only had 1,000 people. If you went out and gathered 1,000 random people, would you be able to build this town? Let's go back even further. They say this town was founded with the railroads in 1868. But in 1859, a man named Charles Fuller built a log bridge and hotel across the Truckee River. In 1861, this bridge was purchased by a man named Myron C. Lake. In early spring of 1862, all the bridges along the Truckee River were destroyed by severe flooding, and Mr. Lake was the only one to rebuild. He also had it put into law that no other bridge could be constructed within 1 mile of his, and he charged people to cross the river. However, if we go to Wikipedia, we can see they claim the bridge was destroyed by flooding in 1861 and rebuilt as a toll bridge before being sold to Myron Lake. Wikipedia also claims that Myron's bridge was destroyed by flooding in 1867 and was replaced by a new bridge. But this bridge became unneeded after the arrival of the railroad. But strangely, the Citizendium claims that the bridge withstood the floods in 1867. It also claims it was Lake himself who contacted the Central Pacific Railroad construction leader Charles Crocker with an offer to provide land for a town site and railroad crossing. Why would Lake contact the Central Pacific Railroad Company to construct a railway that put his own bridge out of business? It is much more likely that Lake contacted the railroad company after discovering the tracks were buried under the mud. Once again, let's look at this photo from 1863, 5 years before the town was even founded. The roads are being dug up. Why? What are they looking for? Perhaps they're looking for railroad tracks that they know must be there, buried deep under the ground after this town was hit by a mud flood. Now let's go back to the first person who owned the bridge, Charles Fuller. They say he built the bridge in 1859, and after that a small community grew around him. So before the bridge, there was nothing here. 1 year later, there are 1,035 inhabitants. Let's say that 4 people share a house. That is 259 houses that are needed. Now today, in our modern world with machines, cars and power tools, a house takes on average 6 months to build. A report from the National Association of Home Builders says that in our modern age, with all the modern benefits, it takes an average 22 subcontractors to build a house. This says it would take 26 to 32 workers on a 3 to 4 month construction of a home. So let's be generous and say in 1859, it would take 30 workers 6 months to construct a house. This is without power tools, and they have no trains to bring in the materials, so it's all horse and buggy. In 12 months, 30 workers could make 2 houses. So 259 houses times 30 workers, but divide by 2 because they can make 2 houses in 1 year. That gives us the amount of workers we'd need, which is 3,885. I mean, come on, that's ridiculous. There's only 1,035 people in the town, yet they'd need 3,885 workers just to construct the homes. How many of the 1,035 inhabitants are builders? Surely there are other workers too, shopkeepers, farmers, miners, etc. And then how many are children, or how many are too old to build houses? Not to mention who is making the bricks, pouring the cement, delivering the materials. This is building a whole town. It's a huge operation. 3,885 workers just to build the homes, but who provides the materials? Who transports them? Who feeds the workers? And most importantly, where do the workers sleep? There are no houses yet. They must have food, clean water, building supplies, and somewhere to rest comfortably. It doesn't make sense. This image shows the hotel at Lakes Crossing, which they say existed from the original 1859 bridge. So who was this hotel for? If there was no town, then why is there a hotel? It can't be a hotel for the workers because there's no way the 3,800 workers could stay here. So where are they staying? We just have to rely on the images and the drawings that they give us to build a picture. And unfortunately, we will never know the true history of these buildings because Reno was destroyed by fire. The most famous fire was in 1879, but in 1873 there was another barely spoken of fire in the business sector of the town which destroyed more than 100 buildings. Not surprisingly, one of the only articles that still remains relating to this fire is kept behind a paywall. Fortunately, I was able to find this article which says, with the exception of the railroad hotel and the buildings east and north thereof, the whole town is in ashes. We happened to be on our way home from San Francisco and got to Reno to find it a waste of smoke and flame. They say the fire originated from a defective stovepipe in Madden's hotel. The alarm was given at 10:30 p.m., but the flames couldn't be stopped. The entire business portion of the town, with the exception of half a dozen or so buildings, is destroyed. Only a handful of buildings survived, including the railway building and its hotel, the Chamberlain Hotel, and the Masonic Temple. The entire length of Virginia Street, with the exception of the buildings heretofore named, is gone. The burnt district comprises the entire portion of the business part of town. No private residences were burned. There are many questions to be answered about this fire. They claim it was caused by a faulty stove in a hotel. So why does this article claim it was caused by an incendiary? Incendiary, an incendiary bomb or device. So which is it, an accident or a bomb? Also, we must ask why there are so many hotels in a town that was founded only 5 years earlier. Why so many hotels when the population is only 1,035? They expect you to believe that 10 years earlier this was nothing but a log bridge in the middle of nowhere. But now they have hotels, railroads, hairdressers, butchers, supermarkets, clothes stores, theaters, bars, and hundreds of houses. And conveniently, all of these businesses, except for a select few, were destroyed in this great fire which history just never talks about. And it's not surprising that right after the fire they found the courthouse. Built of red brick supposedly between 1871 and 1873, the land was donated by, you guessed it, Myron C. Lake. And it's also not surprising that the only buildings to survive this fire were the ones owned by the controllers. For example, the Masonic Temple survived the Great Fire of 1873 and even went on to survive the Great Fire of 1879. On March 2nd, 1879, the wind that hit Reno was so strong that people struggled to walk in the street. At 5:55 a.m., the city's fire alarm sounded. Notice 555, which is the Masonic code. Why exactly 5:55 a.m.? Because they're playing games. It's a joke. None of this story is telling you the truth, so they insert the code. Now I'm sure you're wondering what caused this second Great Fire in Reno. Well, it's another faulty stovepipe. The exact same story, except this time the fire started behind the Railroad Hotel instead of Madden's Hotel. The story goes that at 5:55 a.m. exactly, Miss Ann Hogan was the first to see the fire. She was just up walking at 5:55 a.m. when she saw the fire and ran home to tell her sons. They ran and rang the emergency bell, but by the time all the citizens had assembled, the fire was uncontrollable. They say the powerful wind fed the flames and scattered burning cinders throughout the city. They say that burning embers were blown out to ranches nearly 3 miles away, and yep, you guessed it, set them on fire. That's how they explain these fires erupting in different places and up to 3 miles away, because the wind had carried the burning embers. Now, only 3 buildings survived, including the Baptist Church and again, the Masonic Temple. Despite only 3 buildings surviving in the entire city, the population increased by 161% over the next 10 years. Somehow, these people not only rebuilt hundreds of houses, hotels, theaters, and other large buildings, but they managed to accommodate for a population increase of 161%. Where were all of these people staying? In the burnt, ruined hotels? Where were they buying their food? From the burnt farms 3 miles down the road? Everything had to be rebuilt. The city was reset. But people kept coming, and they were happy to move into a destroyed town with no buildings and no food. That's what they want you to believe. And only 20 years after this disaster supposedly destroyed everything, after it sent this town back to the Stone Age, they've constructed this new bridge. That's what they say. I think this bridge was here before. This is the same bridge that they found when they first moved to Reno. This is why it survived all the floods when the log ones got washed away. This was here before, and probably so is the town. To make the history even more confusing, the actual sign that is displayed at the Virginia Street Bridge says, in 1859, one of the area's early residents, Charles W. Fuller, built a dwelling on the south side of the Truckee River. He constructed a 17-mile crude stretch of road, and he received permission to collect tolls. The following year, he built a wooden bridge across the river. The winter of 1862 had considerable flooding, and this bridge, along with all the others along the Truckee, was swept away. The following year, Myron C. Lake purchased the property from Fuller and replaced the bridge. So this is actually claiming that Myron C. Lake purchased the bridge in 1863, when it was already destroyed, and then he rebuilt it. Because of course on Wikipedia they claim that Myron C. Lake purchased it in 1861, 2 years after it had been constructed by Charles W. Fuller. But if we go to Myron C. Lake's biography on the Citizendium, claims here that he already owned the bridge before it was destroyed by flooding in 1862, whereas the Wikipedia for the bridge itself claims that the first bridge was built in 1860, destroyed by flooding in 1861, rebuilt as a second bridge, and then sold to Myron Lake, also in 1861. And then it wasn't destroyed again until 1867. But if we go to the Citizendium, it actually claims that the bridge withstood the flood in 1867. So they don't seem to be able to get this story straight at all. Or perhaps they found it in 1859 and it took them 9 years to dig everything out and get the railroad station built. And once they got the trains going, that's when they officially said, right, we've found this city. It's pretty evident that the fires are cover-ups to destroy the old buildings and reset this city. Because now we have no evidence. All the old buildings are gone, and we just have to trust their word, their pictures, and their drawings. Out with the old and in with the new. But the one thing that doesn't lie is the population. Ask yourself, how did they do this with so few people? How did they make all of this? Where were the workers coming from? What did they eat? Where did they sleep? We needed 3,885 workers just to build the houses in 1860. But what about all the buildings in the business sector that burned down in 1873? Who built them? How many people did it take for them? And what about all the hotels as well? How many people to build those? None of it makes sense. But make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more. Leave a comment down below where you'd like me to go next. And if you want to support the channel in any way, then you can reach out to me. And also a big shout out to my friend Tartaria Lives on X. He's a big fan of me and I'm a big fan of him. Thank you for watching. I've been your host John Thompson, and this is Old World USA.